Okay, we opened up our sermon series last week on the book of Joel, and we learned right out of the bat that Joel is prophesying to a community in crisis, to people that are in crisis. The kingdom of Judah had been hit with a devastating plague of locusts. All of the crops in the region had been destroyed. This was threatening their livelihoods. This was threatening their very lives. That's how intense this crisis was. And I know many of you wonder, what does a pastor do during the week and besides preach on Sundays? So I just want you to know that I flew over to the Middle East during the week this week, and I spent my time doing an archaeological dig throughout the area of Judah, and I came across never seen before footage of what happened in Judah when the plague of locusts came. And then I flew back. I know I'm super tired, and I know that you didn't think that video technology existed back then, but this is just what I was able to find. So take a look at the screen at what I unearthed as the plague of locusts came into Judah.
More food on the island.
If we give up any more, we'll starve.
Hopper won't accept this. Mother, it's not enough. What do we do?
I don't know.
You little termites! I give you a second chance, and this is all I get!
But Hopper, we ran out of time.
Have you been playing all summer? You think this is a game?
No, please.
Well, guess what? You just lost. Not one ant sleeps until we get every scrap of food on this island!
Just do what he says. You don't want to make a man. Believe me.
No. You're staying with me, Your Highness. Where do you think you're going?
I know that this is ants and not people, and it's grasshoppers, not locusts, but it's pretty much the same thing that happened to Judah back in their day. Super scary, I know. Difficult to watch, but we really get that visceral understanding of what Judah was going through in this catastrophic event. Many of us here in this room are facing our own crises. Maybe it's housing, employment, physical health, family, our finances, addictions, mental health, immigration status. Maybe our lives have been touched by violence. But we are in the middle of crisis some way and somehow. And if you're not experiencing crisis right now, how many of you know that at some point we will be experiencing crisis? Plus, all of us are carrying the weight of knowing all of the catastrophes that are currently plaguing people we know, our city, our nation, our world. I imagine most of us are fatigued, we are drained, we are exhausted, we are in pain, we are frustrated, we are angry, we are confused, we are hurting, and we are despairing. Due to what we are experiencing, due to what we have experienced, and knowing what other people are experiencing, all of us are living under an immense burden, an immense strain, and immense stress. Some of us have turned to coping mechanisms, distraction methods, modes of mental escape. We are trying to distance ourselves. We are shutting down. We are withdrawing. We are doing different things to try to deal with and manage the burden, the anxiety, and the suffering. And we know that we are not handling things well, or we are not living at our best in the midst of the chaos and the strain of this world. And with all that is going on in our lives and with all that is going on in our world that we are facing, I believe our hearts echo the same sentiment that Frodo gives in Lord of the Rings when he says, "I wish it need not have happened in my time." "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." When we hear these words and we are trying to consider what do we do with the time that is given us in the midst of the current climate and circumstances that we find ourselves in, with so much that is so heavy, with so much that is so despairing, and we still hear the words of Eugene Peterson calling us as Christians to be a colony of heaven in the midst of a country of death. How do we do this? Is it even possible when it feels like we don't even want to get out of bed some days? When it feels like we have no energy or bandwidth left? When we're feeling so confused, so lost, so hurt, and so paralyzed? What does it mean to experience a taste of heaven and live out heaven here on earth in the midst of the brokenness? It just seems impossible. Living with light in the midst of such darkness seems improbable. Tapping into contentment, joy, peace, energy, hope, and a zest for life in the midst of such difficulties and such injustices in the world, it seems inaccessible to us, doesn't it? But now Joel is here to help us. Joel comes to the people of Judah, and he is guiding them in how to live and how to respond as they survey their ruined land, as they look around and experience the endangered lives around them. And he comes to them and he says, you can access the blessing of God's presence in the midst of this storm, and there is hope for future restoration and renewal. The core message of Joel is that you and I are able to experience and dwell in the presence of God in the midst of all that we face and all that we go through. You and I can live blessed lives, and then you and I can also be conduits for the presence of God to those around us as we help other people experience the joy and the delight of living in God's presence and with God's presence in the midst of trials, crisis, and catastrophe. Literally us becoming a colony of heaven in a country of death. So what do? How do we get there? Well, Joel is leading us on this journey, and here in this passage that we're looking at as he opens up his prophecy, Joel first calls the people into mourning. If you and I want to experience blessing, renewal, and live the good life, we have to learn how to lament and we have to learn how to mourn. And this echoes what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount when he tells the people, "Blessed are those who mourn." Why? For they will be comforted. Before we move into anything else, we have to learn to be people that are comforted. Experiencing the soothing blessing of God's presence in the midst of our pain begins when we practice mourning. This is how you and I begin to access the good life in the midst of bad circumstances. I want us to reread our text that Claire read for us this morning. And I want us to pay close attention to the repetitive nature of Joel's call to the people to mourn. Wake up, you drunkards, and weep. Wail, all you drinkers of wine. Wail because of the new wine, for it has been snatched from your lips. A nation has invaded my land, a mighty army without number. It has the teeth of a lion, the fangs of a lioness. It has laid waste my vines and ruined my fig trees. It has stripped off their bark and thrown it away, leaving their branches white. Mourn like a virgin in sackcloth, grieving the betrothed of her youth. Grain offerings and drink offerings are cut off from the house of the Lord. The priests are in mourning, those who minister before the Lord. The fields are ruined, the ground is dried up, the grain is destroyed, the new wine is dried up, the olive oil fails. Despair, you farmers, wail, you vine growers, grieve for the wheat and the barley, because the harvest of the field is destroyed. The vine is dried up and the fig tree is withered. The pomegranate, the palm, and the apple tree, all the trees of the field are dried up. Surely the people's joy is withered away. Do you see what he's doing? He is painting a stark picture of the devastation, the complete devastation that has ruined the land. And repetitively, as he's describing how dire the situation is, he calls for the people to grieve and to mourn, to weep and to wail. There's actually three main sections in this text where Joel is calling out three distinct groups of people, calling these groups of people into mourning: the drunkards, the priests, and the farmers. Now, Joel isn't coming right out in his statement here telling the people that the locusts have come because of their sin and their rebellion. But if we look at Joel chapter 2, verses 12 through 14, he writes, "Even now declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning. Rend your heart and not your garments. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love, and he relents from sending calamity." Who knows? He may turn and relent and leave behind a blessing, grain offerings and drink offerings for the Lord your God. We can infer from this passage that yes, the people have strayed. The people have messed up. They have turned away from God, and God is now getting their attention through sending the locusts to get them to turn back and return to him. And the fact that Joel is naming these three categories, the priests, the farmers, and the drunkards, he is giving us a greater clue as to what the actual corruption and dysfunction was inside of Judah. So when he calls out the drunkards, we see that he is naming that Judah has become corrupt in their moral system. Individual people throughout the area are living lives of excess for themselves. The idea that people are getting drunk and using things beyond the means of what they were intended for helps us understand that Judah had compromised their character through their conduct. They were selfish and they were indulgent. By naming the priests, Joel is identifying that the religious system in the country had become corrupt. They were not just worshiping Yahweh, but they were worshiping other gods. The priests were to be the judges for the people, so when people had conflict and things arose, the priests were not judging fairly. They were showing favoritism to people. There was injustice happening. And then he calls out the farmers, because there is a corrupt economic system at work in Judah. You've got people who are hoarding a lot of things, and you have people who don't have enough. There's not enough equity and sharing. You have people that are starving, while you've got people that are getting fat, and this is not the way the Lord intended it to be. The drunkards, the priests, and the farmers show us that Judah had become corrupt morally, religiously, and economically. Now, even though we can see that Judah is in crisis because of their rebellion, Joel still gives the prophecy in a vague enough way that it also applies to our lives, each of our lives, when crisis comes our way, and that crisis isn't fully directly initiated by God, but we are just being touched and impacted by a broken and fallen world. So whether our pain and our suffering is a result of God trying to get our attention, or if it's because of happenstance in the world, the command that Joel gives you and I in our lives is still the same. Become a people that know how to mourn. Mourning is different than experiencing grief and sadness. Mourning is an action. It is something that you and I do or practice in the midst of our pain, our disappointments, and our anguish. It's an outward expression of what we're feeling inwardly. Dr. Sarah Dash puts it this way: grief and mourning are common terms to describe feelings and behaviors following a loss. Although sometimes used interchangeably, grief and mourning represent different parts of a loss. While grief represents the thoughts and feelings experienced following a loss, mourning includes outward expressions or signs of grieving. The other word lament might be useful here because maybe you're more familiar with the concept of lament, and we find psalms of laments. In Job, there's words of lament. Lamentations, the entire book is a lament. In order for you and I to enter into a process of finding renewal, restoration, life, and live a life different than what we are experiencing right now when there is so much pain and death touching us and surrounding us, the very first step Joel gives us is to become people who lament and people who mourn. So what does this look like? What do we do? What are we expressing? What are we engaging in as we are experiencing our grief, our sadness, our pain, our loss, as we are in the midst of crisis? The first component of lament, and I'm going to give us 6 different components. The first part is that it is emotive. It is a release of emotion. You've got the people wailing. You've got the people weeping. There's something they're touching into their emotions. They're not just feeling their emotions, but they're expressing their emotions. Psalm 38, 9 through 10. The psalmist laments by saying, "All my longings lie open before you, Lord. My sighing is not hidden from you. My heart pounds. My strength fails me. Even the light has gone from my eyes." There's such an emotional response that's happening as the psalmist is in lament. The second component is that lament is symbolic. Typically, in the Old Testament era, you would tell and understand that a person was in lament because they would tear their clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. Look at Esther chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So when we are appropriately responding with lament, we're not just releasing our emotions, we're also doing something symbolic to demonstrate and to show that we are grieving and we are mourning. The third component is that it's worshipful. Being reminded that this is a spiritual practice that is God-centered. A lot of us make the mistake of trying to engage in lament by making ourselves the center. But yet, lament is about us taking our difficult emotions and bringing those emotions to God. Look at what Diana Groover said. She says, the lament psalms aren't about letting emotions go wild. They are a means of bringing these wild emotions to God himself. We are admitting and recognizing that what we are going through is painful, and we are expressing and bringing this hurt, this pain, this rage, this anger, whatever it is that we've got going inside, we are coming and we are bringing them to God, who is at the center, versus making our emotions the center and making ourselves the center. When we do that, we engage in idolatry. God always has to be the center. The fourth component of lament is it tends to be prophetic. It is a public witness. What are we doing with the release of emotions, with the symbolism, with the worship? We are publicly witnessing and verbalizing hard truths. And we are being confessional. And we are calling out sin. And we are naming injustice. Look at Lamentations 1:8. Jeremiah declares, Jerusalem has sinned greatly, and so has become unclean. All who honored her despise her, for they have all seen her naked. She herself groans and turns away. And then if we look at Psalm 62, another psalm of lament, the psalmist is naming injustice as he is releasing this emotion. How long will you assault me? Would all of you throw me down, this leaning wall, this tottering fence? Surely they intend to topple me from my lofty place. They take delight in lies. With their mouths they bless, but in their hearts they curse. When we lament, and we lament appropriately for all that is going on in the world, we are making it public. We are making it known what is right and what is wrong. Another component of lament is that it's hopeful. It's not just despairing. We recognize that God is still worthy to be praised and to be trusted. We don't lose our hope in him. I just read out of Psalm 62, this psalm naming injustice, but then in the very next verses, in verses 5 through 8, the shift happens and the lamenter says, yes, my soul finds rest in God. My hope comes from him. Truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken. My salvation and my honor depend on God. He is my mighty rock, my refuge. Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. Some of us are living on the extremes. We're trying to act like nothing's wrong, and we're trying to be all hopeful and optimistic about everything. And that's not real, that's not honest, that's not who we're supposed to be. But then on the other end of the extreme, some of us are just wailing in the grief and in the sadness, and we don't know how to declare the goodness of God and put hope and trust in God in the midst of all that is going wrong. When we lament and when we grieve appropriately, the duality comes together. The grief and the hope exist simultaneously. In the sadness, we can still rejoice. In the pain, we can still declare the goodness of God. And then the final component of lament, it's both individualistic and collective. Look at what happens in Ezra chapter 10, verse 1. Ezra was praying, confessing, weeping, and throwing himself down before the house of the Lord. He was in lament. And a large crowd of Israelites, men, women, and children, gathered around him, and they too wept bitterly. You've got an individual who's lamenting, and then you've got a collective group of people that are lamenting. Now, many of us avoid this practice for many different reasons. And speaking for myself, I would always try to sidestep it or maybe just take it out of the equation and move into other things, because when we lament, it causes us and forces us to face our feelings. And a lot of times when we're lamenting, these are difficult feelings. These are feelings we don't want to have. We wish they weren't part of us, whether it's anger, rage, disappointment, sadness, you name it. Lament is uncomfortable, and we're looking for comfort. But in order for us to be comforted, as Jesus says, we have to go through the uncomfortable process of lament. And if we try to avoid it in search of comfort, comfort will remain elusive. Also, I'm a really good white male Midwesterner, and I've been taught to repress my emotions rather than to express them. Anyone else with me? That's what was modeled for in my family. We don't talk about these things. Also, for myself, lament is difficult, and it's also frustrating because it doesn't feel like a solution. And when I'm in the struggle and when I'm suffering, what do I want? I want this season to end. I want the feelings to go away. I want the situation to change. So whenever I say, well, instead of trying to fix the problem, let's acknowledge that there's just a problem without trying to fix it, that doesn't put an end to my pain and to my suffering. It's just me saying and stating that it's here and it's with me. And that doesn't feel like a solution. The Bible over and over again leads us towards lament and offers instructions and helpful material to facilitate it. But yet this practice seems so absent in our churches and in our worship. And we're tending to lean towards, as I just mentioned, other solutions before we lean and enter into lament. But what Joel tells us is before you turn to any other solution in your life, you got to first learn how to mourn. You need to first learn how to lament and receive the comfort of the Lord. Then we move on to the next steps. So the next steps that we always are trying to get to is, well, if we feel like we are being touched in our lives by God because of our sinful behavior, well, what's the most important thing to do? Well, we need to repent, and we need to fix things, and we need to become more holy. We need to become more sanctified. So instead of mourning, we're now working on holiness. And it's not that holiness is a bad thing, but we've skipped a step. Sometimes when we're in crisis, we recognize and see that our faith is weak. And yes, maybe our faith needs to be strengthened, but before we move and work on strengthening our faith, we are being called to stop, grieve, lament, mourn first. Maybe when crisis hits, you get that real sense that it's the devil. The devil's coming against me. Satan is on the attack. He's prowling. He's trying to tear my life apart. He's trying to get me. He knows that I'm trying to grow closer to the Lord. So he's coming in with these things to try to tear me down. So we try to fight him. We try to resist him. And those are good things. We're supposed to resist the devil. But yet, it's not just about resisting. First, we need to stop and lament and mourn before we resist. Maybe we've been taught that we're supposed to rejoice in all circumstances. So in the midst of our despair, in the midst of our pain, we just slap a grin on our face and we just try to laugh our way through it. Some of us avoid lament because we are in hiding. Lament is a very transparent, vulnerable practice because people see us in a difficult emotional state. We're doing demonstrations of movement and different, it's uncomfortable. We'd rather just keep the mask on. But as a church, this should be a place where we teach about it, we implement it, and we practice it. Life shouldn't be about us coming together as a church to always talk about victory, overcoming, joy, celebration at level 10 at all times. That is a one-dimensional type of faith that does not lead you and I to the good life. Whereas always wallowing, always in despair, always in struggle, that's not the good life either. We cannot exist on either end of the spectrum. The good life comes when we are able to find hope in the midst of our pain. This is the gateway. This is the first step. If you and I want to experience real relief, comfort, and contentment in this life, it has to start with this spiritual practice. So now that we talked a little bit about what it looks like for us to lament, the different components of it, what is the Bible telling us we should be lamenting? And the first thing that we see in our passage here today through Joel is sin. The people of Judah had sinned greatly against the Lord. And now, in order for them to be restored, repentance of sin, confession of sin, this is all going to be part of the process that Joel leads the people through. But the very first step is before we can fix it, we need to lament it. That's what David does in Psalm 51, create in me a clean heart. When he had sinned with Bathsheba, his restoration started and began with lament. The thing is when you and I sin, when you and I make mistakes, and when you and I mess up and do things that are a disappointment to God, those actions should be accompanied with difficult emotions. And if you and I are in a place in our lives where we are able to sin against God and not feel any sense of remorse, regret, or guilt, we are in a pretty difficult spot. Our hearts have become too hardened, and we need the Lord to come in and break our hearts back open. But it's natural and normal whenever we make these mistakes for us to feel a sense of guilt, to feel a sense of shame. These difficult emotions, they come in, and then we need to mourn. They are an invitation for us to grieve. Now, we don't want these emotions to fester in us, to control us, or to turn into a deep-rooted shame, but we are being invited to mourn over our sin, to cry out in sorrow, to begin to look for his forgiveness and for his restoration. And the Bible doesn't tell us to only lament over our own sin. We lament over the sins of others. In our passage from Ezra, Ezra was mourning over the sin of the exiles. It wasn't his sin, but theirs, their sinful behaviors. It should grieve us. The actions of other people that cause us to get angry, that cause us to get sad, that cause us to feel disappointed. The answer and the solution for us is not to become people of outrage, but to become people of grief. So when we're looking around this world, our city, our country, and we see the brokenness, and we see the evil actions, and we see the injustices, and we see everything that is going on, the Bible instructs us to take all of that and to bring it before God in our lament. Sadness is another thing we're supposed to lament. The shortest verse in the Bible is found in the Gospels, and it's 2 words, and it is Jesus wept. If you're looking for a verse to memorize, start there, because that's an easy one. And when Jesus wept, the story that verse is found in is in the story of his friend Lazarus dying. Jesus, in the midst of his own sadness, mourned. Sickness, death, loss of a job, loss of a relationship, bad grades in school, divorce of parents, losing pets. Like, there's so many things that we can talk about that bring sadness into our life. It's not connected to sin of us. It's just a matter of these things happen and they're painful. And we should not ignore these things. We should not try to avoid these emotions. We should not numb ourselves through this stuff. We find comfort and we find peace by facing these emotions, taking them, acknowledging them, and then bringing them before the Lord through prayer, using the Psalms and other tools found in Scripture. Scripture also tells us to lament when we suffer. One of the best imageries we have of lamenting while suffering, I think, is Paul and Silas while they were in prison. They had been thrown in prison, which is not an ideal situation to be in. And what does the book of Acts tell us? It tells us that they worshiped and sang songs while they were there in prison. And when I was a little kid, I think I got skewed a little bit to think that probably what they were doing were singing like joyful worship songs, like celebrating God in the midst of being in chains. I think that's how it was presented to me as a kid. But the older I've gotten, I've opened myself up with the imagination to ask myself, what if what they were doing was singing songs of lament while they were in their chains? What if they were turning to psalms that we've been talking about here, like that are crying out to God in despair and sorrow, and that was their worship? You see, our worship isn't always rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Our worship is also, God, life sucks right now. When you and I are persecuted, when we're oppressed, when we're treated unfairly, when we're mistreated, when we're taken advantage of, when we experience injustice or a miscarriage of justice, we are not supposed to turn to revenge. We are not supposed to turn to violence, but instead, as Christians, we are called to mourn. We process our pain through lamenting. Even though we might be marginalized, victimized, oppressed, disregarded, or discarded by others, we mourn, and the Spirit of God meets us in our mourning, and He comforts us, and He wraps us with love, with care, and with dignity if we are willing to cry out to Him. And that cry, which is a public cry, also becomes that symbolic act of prophecy, because as we are lamenting, what are we doing? We are naming the injustice. We are speaking truth about the abuses. We are shining a light on the disparity. So lament is not just offering us comfort, it's also arresting people and a world to see that we are truth tellers and we are naming these things. It is not a quiet, mournful song, but it is a powerful siren that lament comes in and disrupts the evil, and it sends cracks and fissures into corrupt systems. Psalm 94, the Lord is a God who avenges. This is a psalm of lament. O God who avenges, shine forth. Rise up, judge the earth, pay back to the proud what they deserve. How long, O Lord, will the wicked, how long will the wicked be jubilant? We feel these things. We need to name them and bring them before the Lord. And then finally, we also mourn in solidarity with others. N.T. Wright offers an illustration of how he learned to participate better in the suffering of other people. He writes, several years ago, I began praying the Psalms regularly. I discovered early on that there were several Psalms that just didn't seem to fit my life. I had little to no devotional use for them. But as I learned more about the practice of psalm praying, I realized that the whole point of such a practice was to put me among the congregation of the saints, all who had come before and all who are around the world today. Maybe I was not being pursued by enemies or hemmed in on every side, but what about the Christians in Syria? What about Susan, who was dealing with a cancer diagnosis? The better I got at a prayerful imagination, the more I began to realize that psalm praying was a participation in the prayer life of the church, historic and global. Lament is not only for the suffering, it is for solidarity with the suffering. We love our neighbor when we allow their experience of pain to become the substance of our prayer. This, after all, is what Jesus did for us. How many of us are just dealing with the immensity of the tragedies and the struggles and the problems that are facing us in our world? We scroll through social media and we see all of the devastation. We see all of the injustice. What we are taught is we come alongside people in solidarity. What can we do when people are halfway across the world? We can lament, grieve, and mourn with them in solidarity. As we prepare to close, we're going to move towards a short time of response together where I feel like we should do just what we're talking about. Try to engage in lament. But before we do that, I want to create this clear distinction that if we are wrestling with difficult emotions, that's different than living with a medical diagnosable disorder. Lament and mourning are spiritual tools that we use to process difficult emotions, but they are not a replacement for any treatment we might need medically if we have a medical condition. In fact, if we do find ourselves with a medical condition, we can mourn and lament that we have the condition, but then we still seek out treatment, whether that's through medication or therapy. I really hope that you're understanding, as I'm painting this picture, that Judah had just been hit by a major crisis. And this crisis was threatening their very lives. This was not small potatoes. We're talking big potatoes. There was widespread panic, anxiety, despair, confusion, anger, and sadness. And does that feel familiar to anyone? Can any of us identify with panic, anxiety, despair, confusion, anger, and sadness because of what's happening in our lives and what is happening around the world, what's happening in our city, what's happening in our jobs, in our families? And if we can identify and say, yeah, I'm experiencing some of these same things, then we need to allow Joel to capture our attention so that we do exactly what Joel told the people of Judah to do. And he says, weep, wail, express it, let it out, bring it before the Lord. Before you try to fix anything, before we move into whatever the next steps are, we need to stop. Acknowledge these emotions, present these emotions as difficult as they are. We need to come to God in prayer individually, collectively, corporately, and symbolically, prophetically, all these things, and bring it and release it and demonstrate it. I think of a child who wakes up in the middle of the night with a nightmare, a terrible dream. They wake up and they're in their room and it's dark and there's shadows and they're scared and they're panicking. And what does that little child do whenever that child has a nightmare? The first response is that child cries out and screams. I know I've parented 2 kids. This is what happens, right? And what do we as parents do? All of a sudden, we get woken up in the middle of the night, hearing the screams of our children in their bedrooms as they're having their nightmare, as whatever it is, and we rush into the room, we pick up that child, and we hold them close and tight, and we begin to soothe them, we begin to sing to them, we begin to calm them down. Everything's going to be okay. I am here. You're not alone. Like all of this stuff, and we bring them back to a state and a place of restfulness and peace to where we can lay them back down in the bed and they go back to sleep. Many of us feel like we are living in a nightmare, or we are just acutely aware of everybody else's nightmares that they are living. And all of this is weighing so heavy on us. But what are we doing? We're supposed to be crying out to God like that little child calls for their parents, for God to come to soothe us, to comfort us, and to put us back to a state of rest. But we're not doing that. We're turning to other things. We're doing other practices. We're taking everything that is going on, affecting us, touching us, and we're choosing it to deal with it and handle it in some other way than to cry out to God like a vulnerable child. I'm here to tell us that we will not find true, lasting comfort. We will not find true, lasting rest until we learn to grieve and mourn. Our hearts and spirits might be temporarily soothed with things that we do and things that we try, but we're not going to find a real deep sense of soothing if we don't lament. And guess what? If you and I don't know how to find rest, we cannot be renewed with strength and energy to be the people that God is calling us to be. God is not calling you and I to sleepwalk through this world like zombies with no energy and no ability and no reserves to be able to serve others and help others because we are just in utter exhaustion. God wants to give us rest and renewal, and it's found in Matthew 5:4 when Jesus says, "You are blessed when you mourn, because then you'll receive comfort." Are we desperate enough yet to be free from the despair, the depletion, and the drain that we're under? That we're willing to say, okay, God, let's start doing this your way versus me doing it my way. God, I'm ready to cry out to you because I need you to soothe me. I need you to calm me. I need you to put me to rest so that I can wake up renewed with strength, energy, hope, and joy. And if you and I can learn to do this practice and begin to engage with the problems of our life and the problems in the world with this initial step, we are on our way to seeing Psalm 30 verses 11 and 12 lived out in our lives, where we can also declare with the psalmist, God, you turned my wailing into dancing. God, you removed my sackcloth of mourning and you clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing your praises and not be silent. Lord my God, I will praise you forever. In case you're wondering, what I am telling us is that it is very much possible for you and I to experience joy and peace in the midst of grief, loss, and pain. It is very much possible for you and I to feel like our lives are being restored and rebuilt when so much around us is ruin and rubble. But we have to be willing to come to God as a child and lament. To begin to engage with God more than just with our rejoicing, but to engage Him in our pain.